Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is February 28th. This is the 145th day since October 7th. I wanted to start by a quote from Howard Thurman, a Christian theologian. He said, Jesus rejected hatred. Jesus rejected hatred because he saw that hatred meant death to the mind, death to the spirit, death to communion with his Father. He affirmed life, and hatred was the great denial. So I hope that encourages our spirits today. Might we reject hatred? Might we embrace life? Might we pursue love over violence? So some updates from on the ground. There has been no announcements in terms of a ceasefire hostage negotiation. The head of the Hamas political bureau, Ismail Hanania, said that the organization is showing flexibility in negotiations with Israel in terms of a hostage release ceasefire agreement, but it is prepared to continue fighting. He called on Muslims in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and within the Green Line to come en masse to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and to fortify it on the first day of Ramadan, which will begin in early March. These updates are from Haaretz in large part today. We also know that families of Israeli hostages who are being held by Hamas in Gaza, it's believed to be about 100 remaining hostages there. They began a 4-day march from a parking lot in Ra'im, which is a site near where the Nova Music Festival, a site nearby where the Nova Music Festival massacre occurred. And so these family members are marching for 4 days to Jerusalem, calling for the release of hostages who've been held in captivity now for more than 4 months. On Thursday of this week, representatives from Hamas and Fatah, those are the two main political parties. I mean, Hamas obviously is also a military wing. They were the perpetrators, the organizers of the October 7th attacks. But Hamas and Fatah, the other political party, that is the ruling party in Ramallah of the Palestinian Authority, they will meet in Moscow on Thursday to talk about the formation of a unified Palestinian government. They are not the only political parties in Palestine. So they're going to meet in Moscow on Thursday. They'll talk about the unification of a Palestinian government. They'll talk about the rebuilding of Gaza. And the Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki said that he does not expect any miracles coming out of that meeting. In Lebanon and northern Israel, there were rocket sirens in northern Israel. There continue to be hostilities there. The Israeli Defense Forces said there were about 10 launches from Lebanon that had been detected, several of which had been intercepted. There was a building in the northern city of Kiryat Shimona that had been hit. The IDF attacked several sources of launches in Lebanon overnight into Wednesday, and the Air Force attacked Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon as well. We also know that 160 packages of food and medical equipment were airdropped into southern Gaza. And also the Jordanian Field Hospital in Khan Yunis as a part of an international effort. It included coordination between the Israelis, the US, the UAE, Jordan, Egypt, and France. I actually saw pictures of this on social media. Some of the drops were actually nearby, kind of the sea, and you could see hundreds of people. I mean, it might have been more than that, but it just was hordes of people on the seashore and people kind of swimming. And it looked like people were on paddle boards, trying to get to some of these packages of food that were dropped by the shore. There was significant news yesterday. This was in Axios, and it was reported, you might be familiar with the memorandum. It was a national security memorandum. It was published on February 8th. And the Biden administration issued this memorandum stating that all US weapons that are being supplied to other countries, those countries have to give credible and reliable written assurances that they will use weapons in accordance with international humanitarian law. So this happened on February 8th, and this was also given to Israel. And so this was in response to pressure from Senator Chris Van Hollen and other senators who wanted these requirements to apply specifically to the supplemental as it related to military assistance to Israel. And so yesterday, the Biden administration actually sat down with officials in Israel. My understanding was here in the United States as well. But Israel was given until mid-March to sign a letter saying that U.S. weapons are being used according to international law, and that humanitarian aid is being allowed into Gaza. This matters because these assurances are now a requirement under this memorandum. Israel has not been singled out. The new policy, as I mentioned, came after these Democratic senators expressed concern over Israel's military campaign in Gaza. If the assurances aren't provided by the deadline, U.S. weapons transfers could be paused, and Axios says will be paused. So this is quite significant. That's why this matters. The memorandum also stresses that a country that uses U.S. weapons in conflict areas needs to provide credible and reliable written assurances that it will facilitate and not arbitrarily deny, restrict, or otherwise impede directly or indirectly the transport and delivery of U.S. humanitarian assistance and U.S. government-supported international efforts to provide humanitarian assistance. Countries engaged in conflicts like Israel have 45 days from the day the memo was issued to provide the written assurances and to have them certified by the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken. And other countries have 180 days. The memo requires that the administration provide an annual report to Congress on whether countries are adhering to international law. So U.S. officials in both Washington and Tel Aviv yesterday officially briefed their Israeli counterparts on the policy and gave them a draft letter they need to sign to comply. And a senior Israeli official said the U.S. request was to have the written assurances by mid-March so that Blinken could certify them by the end of the month, and Israel can decide who in the government will sign the letter. Similar letters are given in recent days to other countries. A State Department official said, we continue to implement the National Security Memorandum, having discussions with security partners around the world. So that's a really big deal. And it could be a way that the United States, it's a mechanism where the US could hold Israel accountable, which they have not done, as of October 7th. There's also significant news in the US in terms of the US presidential race and the Michigan primary, which is expected to be a key state, in the upcoming presidential election. Donald Trump beat Nikki Haley in the Republican primaries, 68% to 27%. President Biden won the Democratic primary. But the reason this is significant is the war in Gaza influenced voting. About 13% of Democratic voters cast ballots for what's called uncommitted after activists suggested doing so to protest Biden's policies. In the Obama election, that percentage was only about 11%. And the figures suggest that many Arab and Muslim voters might oppose Biden in November. They're a small share of the electorate, but in a close election, every vote matters. And so an encouraging word at the end of this update is that our prayers matter, our votes matter, our voices matter, our actions matter. And so might we continue to call for a comprehensive ceasefire because the work that we do matters. So may God continue to go before us.